provide. I did not seek the position, but when asked by Chancellor Scott, I did not hesitate too long. At this stage of my life, time is the most valuable commodity to me. Frankly, I've experienced many more yesterdays than I will have the opportunity to experience tomorrows. Thus, I want to use the time available to pursue activities that provide me with the greatest meaning. The opportunity to serve as a member of the California Community College Board of Governors is an exceptional opportunity to contribute in a substantial way. I believe I am reasonably well equipped to do so. With the exception of 2+ years served as an officer in the U.S. Army, my life has been spent in higher education. 11 years on the East Coast, serving at the Pennsylvania State University and Rutgers University, was followed by 6 years with the California Community Colleges. In 1981, I was appointed as president of Santa Barbara City College in Santa Barbara, California. I retired in 2002 after 21 years in that position. My service also included being a board member and chairman of the Accreditation Commission, being an officer president of various statewide community college organizations, and chair of task forces. I believe I have a broad and deep understanding of our colleges. I would be honored by your support to again serve the California Community Colleges. Their critically important educational role, serving Californians and the state, is an activity that I would be privileged to fulfill. I welcome your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. McDougall. Let's hear from Mr. Ramos.
Mr. Chairman, distinguished members of the committee, my name is Henry Ramos, and I am pleased, indeed honored, to appear before you today in connection with my recent appointment to serve on the State Community Colleges Board of Governors. I firmly believe in the mission of the community college system in our state and feel that in my brief service to date, I have been able to help advance that mission. I hope to gain this committee's confidence to be brought forward to the full Senate body for official confirmation of my appointment, and I'm happy, of course, to answer whatever questions you may have for me this afternoon. Thank you for your consideration and the opportunity to be heard. My experience and personal passions coincide nicely with my responsibilities as a member of this important Board of Governors. As a management consultant to many of the nation's leading private foundations, and as a former Washington, D.C.-based policy advocate for veterans of the armed services, I feel I have a good understanding of many of the college's challenges and opportunities from both an institutional and a human capital perspective. And as an individual trained at UC Berkeley and Harvard University in the fields of law and public policy, I feel I have a certain sensibility about the fundamental duties involved in providing service and leadership on the Community Colleges Board. In these difficult economic times, I'm sure you will agree, I think there is much more that we can and must do to expand innovation and private support for our colleges and the statewide community college system. And I hope and expect that my service on this body, with your approval and that of your Senate colleagues, will enable me to contribute further to that important work. I'm happy to take whatever questions you may have.
Thank you very much to both of you. Let me begin by asking sort of the big picture question. And my point of reference is a bill that was rather controversial in the Senate this past year. I don't recall the number exactly, but it was Senator Liu's bill that sought and still seeks to create a real conversation about how to improve student success at the community colleges. And we're all big believers here in the community colleges, but there's also a feeling that in many instances that too many students take the wrong courses, they don't complete the courses they're enrolled in, and that in and of itself is a subject of particular controversy regarding the ADA, if you will, if that's the right term for community colleges, regardless of whether students get paid for the full semester, whether they've actually finished the course. and whether students are working towards some specified objectives. And I wonder if we could just hear your overall perspective on whether we're doing a good enough job emphasizing and measuring student success through the community colleges.
Senator, I think that's an area where you can always do, obviously you can always do a much better job. It's certainly not from a lack of attention and focus on it. And I do feel from my exposure to the colleges that has been an ongoing area of emphasis, and it has been one that the colleges have improved upon. But there's obviously much more that can be done, that will be done. I think it's quite appropriate that the legislature would request to have the Board of Governors concentrate on this. The board will be responsible for appointing a task force and reporting back to the legislature on this. And I think that the attention to it, the study of it, can only improve upon what we're doing. And I think right now there are some initiatives that already are underway that are showing great promise. One at Monterey Community College, and another one at another community college in California, where it's cutting the time down that students are taking on remedial classes, and I think enhancing the numbers who succeed. So I view it as an opportunity for the system-wide effort to focus on it and to use the best that the entire system has to come up with answers. Do you want to follow up with a question on that? Or?
That's all right. Let's hear from Mr. Ramos.
I share those views, and I think that there's more certainly that we need to do in that area. I think, Senator, you're referring to the Lieu proposed legislation. I think it's SB 1143, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, I think that's something that we take very seriously at the Board of Governors level. I think there's certainly issues to be dealt with there. I think, if I'm not mistaken, there is also companion legislation that's being proposed by Senator Padilla that would also help to expedite transfers within the system, which is a big clogging source, a big problem for many people. And this is one of the reasons why we find a lot of people duplicating classes and just essentially advancing inefficiencies in the system. So where we can help to expedite that kind of legislative intervention and partner with the senators and the assembly members in doing so, we would welcome those opportunities.
Thank you. What do you think is the oh, go ahead, Senator Onestad, of course. Yeah.
We've read recently in newspapers about some of the local community colleges not being able to offer the number of courses that they've had in the past, that, i.e. less instruction. And one of the criticisms of SB 1143 is that the findings and the discussion so far seems to indicate that we may see finances going towards support services rather than instructional services. I don't tend to look at that as a positive change. I'm wondering what your reaction is. That is, do we spend the money on more instructors and more instruction, more classes, so the students can get out in a timely manner and take the courses and have them available? Or do we spend the money on counseling? Do we spend it on support services for students and their families? Mm-hmm. That's the question about this bill.
I will take a crack at that, and then Peter. Yeah, I think that it is a legitimate concern, and if I'm not mistaken, I'm a newer member of this board, so I can't prove it scientifically, but I believe that we are held to certain quantitative standards in terms of how the colleges are financed. I believe that 75% of the monies that are directed to the campuses are required to be used for instructional purposes. So in some measure there is, if I'm correct in that, a built-in constraint on our abilities to spend money for alternative support services. But I think, you know, it would be hard to disagree with the essential thrust of your concern, which is that we are there to educate and to provide classroom support for our students. Sadly, as you will recognize, Senator, many of the students, as many as 6 to 7 out of every 10 students that come through our system, already come with deficiencies in basic skills areas like mathematics and English-related preparation. And so, sadly, a lot of the effort, resources, time, and attention that is being directed to those students is for remedial purposes. It's a structural problem that we have to think in a big way about. But that also, I think, is a problem, because for those students to succeed, I do believe there is a case to be made for some outside of the classroom support services. So it is about balancing, in my perspective.
I want to ask about career technical education, which I know is a major piece of the community college's responsibility. What I want to know, though, is from a board perspective, whether you have any vision or ideas about how the community colleges could better coordinate with the high schools to reduce the dropout rate. In other words, the community colleges are rightfully seen as sort of the backstop or the way station, if you will, for students who have dropped out. Maybe they get their GED and then they go to the community colleges. But how do we take all your system's expertise and infrastructure, if you will, and help the high schools build those kinds of programs before young people drop out?
If I may, Henry, please. I think that's a critically important focus, and I think community colleges working with the high schools will help not only in the career technical education component, but also in reducing high school dropout rates, which are quite high, close to 20% at this point. And I think that this is an area that is embraced by the local colleges, and that they will continue to look for how they can improve it. There are many examples of programs, for example, in allied health, a 2+2 program where a student will begin in their junior year of high school and will receive instruction and actually certification as a certified nurse assistant when they graduate from high school. And if they do that and do it successfully, they are admitted to an associate degree nursing program, for example. There are other programs in electronics, automotive technology that have a similar connection to the high school. But to your point, I think those efforts are tremendously worthwhile. I think they should be encouraged. One of the most important meetings, from my perspective, and I just have served on the board since March, was a joint meeting of the Board of Governors with the State Department of Education, where we began to look at where we could work together and support activities that would work on behalf of students. And obviously the career technical area was a very important area of discussion. I expect there will be activities coming from that.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ramos?
I concur in those remarks.
Okay. Like that brevity. Excellent.
I'm trying to be helpful.
Excellent. Thank you. So are there questions from other members of the committee? I want to just take a point of personal privilege and just interrupt for just a moment, because I want to introduce everyone here to the new intern in the Senate Pro Tem's office, Soraya Wright, who's a senior at Arthur A. Benjamin Health Professions High School, a great career education high school here in Sacramento. Several of her fellow students are in other offices in the legislative and executive branches this summer and fall. And you've been very helpful to our staff, the policy unit. We want to thank you and welcome you. Welcome. Give her a hand. CTE at work. All right. Are there witnesses in support of the nominees? Are there witnesses in opposition to the nominees? Are there witnesses who have no opinion? Okay. We are absent one Rules Committee member here today. And Senator Oropeza is recovering and getting better, and hopefully she'll be here next week. If not, we will ensure that we have a full complement of Rules Committee members next week. So what I would propose without objection is that we put your nominations over until next week. You don't have to come back again unless you want to. We have the record, and we will take a vote next week on your nominations. Of course, Senator Dutton. Yes. Yes.
I'm just curious. Yeah, that's fine with me. I'd agree with that. But being they aren't going to maybe be here next week, maybe I'll ask a couple of questions. Mr. McDoodle, I was noticing that for almost 20 years you worked for this one. You had over 20 years, Santa Barbara Community College District, and what have you been doing since 2002?
Well, Senator, the first thing I did is that for 5 years I volunteered to lead a capital campaign for our local hospital, Cottage Hospital, and raised $110 million to do that. I've served also on the board of the Santa Barbara Foundation, local school board, and other volunteer activities. I've been rather fully engaged.
Okay.
And also took some time for travel.
Good. Okay. Well, just curious. Thank you.
All right, if there's nothing else, we want to thank you very much for coming forward. And again, we'll take up the nominations next week.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you very, very much. We appreciate it. I see Senator Wyland here. Senator Cogdill. I understand. Let us move on here. I want to now ask Francis Randy R. Fiorini, Philip L. Eisenberg, Henry Hank Nordoff, and Henry Hank Nordoff as nominees and members of the Delta Stewardship Council. And I know that Senator Wyland wanted to introduce one of the nominees, and I know Senator Cogdill did as well. Why don't we start with Senator Wyland to make a proper introduction. If Senator Cogdill gets here in time, we'll have him. If not, we'll take him. There he is. Voila.
Voila.
Voila. Senator Wyland, why don't you introduce your nominee?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Pro Tem, members. I'd like to introduce Henry Nordhoff, a constituent of mine from San Diego. Hank Nordhoff has, as you can see, a very impressive resume in business and is an entrepreneur with GenPro, one of the biotech companies in our area, which has become enormously successful under his leadership. Beyond that, I think if you look at the community service, the volunteer work that he's done, it's pretty impressive because when you're involved in creating a business and making it go, you don't have a lot of time. And the fact is that Hank Nordhoff has taken the time, whether it's one of the board members of UCSD, the Prostate Cancer Foundation, and many others. I know that and I've read his answers to questions, I know that he will be a diligent and very, very valuable addition to this appointment.
Thank you very much, Senator Wyland. Senator Cogdill, I didn't know you had an interest in this issue. Surprise. Hey, welcome, Dave. And thank you for... Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. It's certainly a pleasure for me to be here today to introduce to you Randy Fiorini, someone I've known now for a number of years and worked closely with on the issue of water, and really someone that I don't believe you could look for a better appointment as it relates to the Delta Stewardship Council. Randy's background as it relates to his personal business, being in agriculture virtually all his life in the Central Valley, running a successful agricultural operation there, and then of course his years of service to the Sherlock Irrigation District as a member of that auspicious board, and then his years with Aqua, serving both as president and as a member of the board for a number of years. Again, I don't think you can find a better nominee, a person with a better background as it relates to this very important issue for all of the state of California, and I certainly can't recommend him highly enough, and hopefully you'll all be able to see the wisdom in his appointment at the conclusion of his confirmation interview here today. And again, I thank you for the opportunity to be here and to present this testimony and to introduce Randy.
Thank you very much to both senators for coming. Let me make some brief opening remarks, and then we'll turn it over to the nominees. The comprehensive water package that we all worked on last fall was hailed by the governor, I think appropriately, as the most important advance in water policy in a generation. And as all of you know who followed it, and certainly all of us who were in the halls last year, it was a monumental struggle. And so now we put together, with the cooperation of the governor, the Delta Stewardship Council, and I believe it frankly has the most important duties of all of the water entities created by statute in fixing the Delta. It undoubtedly will be a long and sometimes thankless and difficult task, and I realize that it is just the beginning for all of you. I want to thank you for your willingness to serve in this very, very important capacity. This is one of these issues where, you know, among probably the vast majority of Californians, you know, eyes may glaze over when we talk about the intricacies of these issues, but we all know that what you're doing is vitally important to the future of California, its prospects economically, its ecosystem, its environment, and certainly the Delta in and of itself. I also want to note that Felicia Marcus, who's the 5th member of the board, is out of the country today, so she'll be heard next week in this committee. With that, let me turn it over to the nominees one at a time. Invite you again to introduce any family member or special guest. Brief opening statement, and then we have a series of questions for you. Should we start with Mr. Eisenberg? I think we should. Mayor, Assembly Member, Chairman.
Chair members, yes, my wife Marilyn is joining me, is in the audience, and I'm very pleased and happy she'd be here. Mr. Chairman, you admonished us to be succinct and short. Would you like me just to answer questions? I've talked to all of you in advance.
I think that would
probably be better.
We all know, Phil, and I'll just say, without giving away my disposition on the vote here, that we are grateful that you're not only a member of the commission, but that you're going to take such a prominent leadership role and devote your full time to this. So,
thank you, sir.
Thank you. And then the hard questions will come in a minute. So, Mr. Fiorini.
Yes, thank you, Chair, honorable members. Senator Cogdill, thank you for the introduction and the recommendation. I will keep my comments brief. As Senator Cogdill mentioned, I'm a lifetime family farmer. I would love to introduce some of my family members, but they're all home helping harvest peaches right now. So I'm on my own. In addition to lifetime family farming, I did serve 16 years, was elected 4 times to serve on the Turlock Irrigation District Board, and served on the Association of California Water Agencies Board for 12 years. In that capacity, I had the exposure to every part of the state and met with urban and rural public water operators, and I think I have a good understanding of the problems that lie before us, in particular the issues that face the Delta. There's no kidding ourselves. The challenge will be difficult, but I'm very optimistic that the legislation has set up an opportunity to solve problems successfully for the long-term benefit of the ecosystem health in the Delta and a reliable supply of water for all of the Californians that now and will in the future depend upon the Delta as a means of conveyance for that water. I am committed to a better Delta and a better California, and I hope that you will find me worthy of recommendation for confirmation to the Senate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nordhoff, excuse me.
Mr. Chairman, others, I know I'm probably the least known among the three nominees, and quite honestly, I like to keep it that way, so I'll just pass. I believe that some of the success I've had in business is transferable to water. A group of us in San Diego, known to Mark, a bunch of old guys, decided to get together and maybe work behind the scenes to tackle some of the big issues. Irwin Jacobs, the founder of Qualcomm, Marilyn Burnham, and some other CEOs. And they appointed me chair and said, come up with a list of issues. And the most important near-term issue in San Diego is water. And the most important strategic issue in San Diego, specifically from an economic standpoint, is water. So we got involved. We had some people who came into the committee and told us about water. We played a role in the legislation. And I got a call from Nathan Fletcher, who knew of my involvement and asked me if I would be willing to do this, and I said absolutely. I retired as president and CEO of GenProbe a little over a year ago. It gave me some time. I'm still chairman. I'm involved in a lot of other stuff, but from a San Diegan standpoint initially, and from a California standpoint, as California goes, so goes the country. And I think we've got some problems, and it's an opportunity for me to give back. And I think I do have a skill set. I hope that will be transferable and make a difference. So thanks for your consideration.
Very good. Thank you all very much. Let's ask a series of questions. I know other members may have questions as well. I think the main question I have at this stage, and maybe starting with Mr. Eisenberg here, is a status report. Tell us how the implementation of the law is going, successes, challenges, and obviously, since we deem ourselves to be in partnership with you at many levels, what we can do to make your work successful.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Well, let me give you a first report. The chemistry is good. A lot of us have not met before, had not worked together, but we've had 5 months' experience now, and with Ms. Marcus coming on at our August meeting next week, we'll be at full capacity. And frankly, the chemistry is good, and that's not unimportant. You know that when you face really painful choices and options and difficult issues, if there's a certain relationship, a certain trust that develops over time, it doesn't make the answers simpler, and it doesn't make the choices politically easy, but it makes the process somewhat more focused and somewhat more comprehensible. You did something last year that, as you know, I predicted you wouldn't do, or gave very low odds that you would do, which was pass a comprehensive set of bills addressing Delta and water policy in the state of California. In my judgment, it's the first time that's happened in at least 50 years. You can argue the creation of the State Water Project and the vote of the public in 1960 was the last time there was a jump in activities in these areas. And it may be the best way to think about the future. Every 30, 40, 50 years or so, legislatures and governors are going to have to go back, reevaluate, restructure, and take another jump in this important area. I sometimes feel as if I take the statute that you passed, in particular Senate Bill 1, the Delta Protection Act, which created us and gave us our duties, I sometimes feel like I have it under my pillow at home. I spend so much time carrying it around because it's a very complex and interesting document to read, and you can actually read it and understand it. You told us to do a bunch of things. Let me just run through, not in order of priority, but in order of structure. You said by no later than January 1st, 2012, we must adopt a legally enforceable Delta plan to guide state actions and local actions in and around these issues. We are on the track to do that. You told us in a one-sentence statement also develop an interim plan. We took that to mean that the section of the legislation that relates to early actions, as you captioned them, things which many have argued, are things that ought to be done without regard to the larger issues. ought to be considered. We hope to adopt that interim plan at our meeting next week. It's been through 3 public iterations, all available on the web, extensive testimony and negotiations, and is a procedural document, but also with clear implications about the ways in which we will operate in the future. You told us, and we have appointed an independent science board, the maximum 10 scientists that you told us to appoint. They all met the test of having a national or international reputation in their field. We went through, forgive me if I have the precise number wrong, we went through 63 applications for the position. There was about a 2-month review period for applications on our part, and about a month review before action. We're very happy to have these people, one from outside the country and others traveling around America. And that was one of the things you told us specifically to do, and we have done that. In addition, we've been setting up the structure for the very complicated process that goes into the Delta Plan, because it is a state regulation. Accordingly, we're going to have to comply with the environmental laws, and we are going to have to do a full environmental report as well as the Delta Plan. To achieve that by the deadline you've given us, which we will do, we will have to essentially, starting September, begin the process on structuring. It's called a notice of preparation of an environmental impact report. I won't bore you with the details. The website is full of them for this meeting. But it's a lengthy process. It requires endless hearings and endless complications. We'll do one other thing in September, October, and November that's probably worthy of note. These early actions that you talked about, once we opened it for public comment, and to no one's surprise, we have a list of 105 of them. Now, I predict that there's some duplication and overlap. Some of them are people who suggested it go in the interim plan, but it's actually going to be a Delta Plan consideration. We're going to start a process, and the staff has recommended we set up a committee to start reviewing that. That'll probably take 6 or 8 days of hearings, whether we do it in committee or the full council. A lot of work on that status. As you know, we've hired 2 sets of consultants, the firm of CH2M Hill, to advise us on our Delta Plan in the environmental review. In addition, the legislation gave us a pretty unique set of characteristics with regard to the Bay Delta Conservation Plan. You designate us as a CEQA responsible agency, a commenting agency in the BDCP process. We have started that. We sent out our first, they're called scoping letters. I won't bore you again. This is CEQA code talk for English, but they are periodic comment letters that all responsible agencies, those who have a statutory duty to comment, do, and we provided our first comment letter in June to the Department of Water Resources. Secondly, you told us that in the development of the plan, if the Bay Delta Conservation Planning process is complete, and if the Department of Fish and Game certifies that the plan meets the thresholds that you put into statute, then we will incorporate in that in the plan. But any person may appeal to the council the Fish and Game's determination. That means we are both a responsible agency for commenting purposes and a potential appellate body. Attorney General called that not usual in law, but there you are. And accordingly, we wanted to be very careful on our advice on this, and so we went out and hired independent consultants on the questions relating to the Bay Delta Conservation Plan. And one of the factors, all of you have gotten the material, so you know this, was that we wanted to hire consultants who had not been, who were not currently or had previously been associated with BDCP. And as you might imagine, in California, that's a small universe. We've hired the firm of Arcadis, an internationally well-known firm, been around since 1880, based in the Netherlands, with offices throughout America and California and Sacramento. And we did that because they made the best proposal to us, but as important as anything else, everybody else had connections. And you have some interesting objectives when you serve all these multiple purposes. We're well underway with all that activity, and we think it'll lead us to the point you want us to go. And as Mr. Fiorini says, the decisions are going to be very tough. The work's going to be long and hard. That's our status report.
How do you avoid prejudicing yourself as an appellate body with regard to the BDCP while commenting at the same time?
Well, you understand, one of the other provisions in the bill, you abolished an entity called CalFed Bay Delta,
correct,
which was set up in the 1990s to settle litigation and so on and so forth. But you transferred all the functions and duties of CalFed Bay Delta to us. We looked at that, and when we started up, it turned out that the practice in CalFed Bay Delta was our chief executive officer, who was transferred to us with the statute, was a member of the steering committee of Bay Delta Conservation Plan. We thought that was a conflict. He resigned. One of the previous appointees to the board was also a member of the steering committee from an environmental organization. He resigned. That's the first thing. We advised the BDCP process we'd follow their activity, but we did not want to be an official part of that process, and that's because of the unique role. And the conflict between a commenting role and a potential appellate role, Senator, is a very difficult one to deal with.
Why do you have to comment?
Because we're a responsible agency under CEQA, and the duty of responsible agencies is to provide comments consistent with their charge and mandate, and this statute is our charge and mandate. And more importantly, the Department of Water Resources, the lead state agency on BDCP, has a duty to deal with comments raised by everyone, and you lose your right if you fail to comment. So, we looked at the statute. You gave us two unique BDCP-related duties, and we thought the independent advice on both was justified in this case. All within the budget, of course, but still a unique situation for a unique grant of authority.
Might be worth further conversation, among us and between you and in the legislature.
Yeah.
Because obviously when you're called upon at the end of the day here to weigh in on the BDCP, and as the appellate body, no doubt whatever it is you decide, which I'm sure will be thorough, well-reasoned, and impartial, want to make sure that there's no one that can question that, right? And that's the...
Mr. Chairman, I have no doubt that no matter what our procedures are or what we did or don't do, somebody will question whatever decisions we make. I have no hesitation in saying that.
Sir?
I'll be one of them.
Yes, sir.
That's the comment?
No, I have a question or two, but I don't know if you're done.
Okay. Can I just finish, and then I'll turn it right over to you. Specific questions for the two other nominees. Mr. Fiorini, you are a farmer from the Central Valley, as you described. And the law that we passed designating appointments for the Stewardship Council did not separately designate appointment slots from people either by industry or by geography, with one exception relating to representation from the Delta. So as you think about your new role here, I just want to ask you whether you feel you are representing Central Valley agriculture, farming in general, aqua, or do you consider yourself to be representing the state as a whole?
Well, although my background is in agriculture and in a specific area of the state, and I receive my water from a locally owned and operated irrigation district, which happens to operate the largest privately or locally owned reservoir in the state of California. My broader experience is the work that I have done with the Association of California Water Agencies. I have a broad exposure to the issues of water throughout the state. So I come to this position with the understanding that my responsibility is to the co-equal goals that the legislation sets forth, and that is to find a way to restore and maintain ecosystem health in the Delta and to find a way to provide California with a reliable, high-quality water supply into the future.
Very good. And the same question for Mr. Nordhoff. You have a very impressive and prominent business background. How do you view your role? How do you view your role? Do you view yourself as representing the business community, San Diego, and their very important interests for the state as a whole? I know that's sort of an obvious question, but I just sort of like you to explain for the record how you balance your background, your specific interests with your larger responsibilities.
I think it's a great question. I think my role and contributions will be as a businessman. And I think I'm probably, with the exception of Randy, the only one there who's run a business, met a payroll, and been concerned about the P&L for a public company. I think there are certain disciplines that you bring to a situation. Business is about solving problems and about seizing opportunities. And when we can get consensus. And I think we have to use an economic basis. I think I wrote up a one-pager on that. If we start with the economic value of an issue, the levies as an example, I think it's quantifiable, it's subjective, and it's a good place to start. The other things, that the politics can be an overlay to that. So I see my major role as bringing a certain business economic discipline to it that I've used for over 40 years in business. The San Diego it was my initial interest, representing the interest of San Diego from a water reliability, one of the two co-equal goals. But if I were to represent only San Diego, my contribution would be almost non-existent. I would be partisan, and the committee cannot work in that fashion. I think we all have to be fact-driven. I'm probably the most naive about the water issues of any member of the committee, and it's been a learning experience for me. But in order for San Diego to be part of a reliable water supply, so many other things have to be integrated into that, or it just wouldn't work for anybody. And that would be the health of the environment of the Delta. So they're all interrelated and equally important.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Senator Onnested.
To give you just a little geography, there are many of the people in my section of the state who believes that Sacramento is Southern California. I represent Northern California, where we have 6 out of the 120 legislators who represent Northern California, that geography. Very sparsely populated, but 80% of the water that goes through the Delta falls on my Senate district. That's where it originates. We have long-standing contracts dating back 150, 160 years, some signed that I've seen personally signed by Ulysses S. Grant, granting certain water rights to farmers and individuals and entities in my district, which are now under fire because of the need for water throughout the state. I guess my vote, my concern is going to be very geographical on this issue, because I feel that Southern California, that is from Sacramento on down, is very well represented on this stewardship council. And I'm not saying that we can't have like interests, but I do know that if a peripheral canal is built, or some other kind of conveyance is built to bypass the Delta to solve the problems, the business needs of Southern California, or the agricultural needs of the lower central part of the Sacramento Valley, that my water users are going to be at risk for those rights. And so I guess my question to you, and I don't know exactly what the legal terminology is, but I guess my question to you is how, on what set of priorities, like from 1 to 10 or whatever, do those long-standing water rights of Northern California interests have in the scope of the need for water for the problems of the Delta in Southern California? And I guess I'd like to have each one of you answer them for me, because I will tell you that my vote will very much depend on how you answer that question.
No pressure.
I'll start, Mr. Chairman and Senator Onstead. The water rights have great legal significance. The legislation you passed said nothing therein intended to interfere with existing water rights. Water right laws are subservient to the Constitution of the state of California. That is the law. It's not a statutory choice, because the Constitution was amended by the voters in 1928 to establish the principles of reasonable and beneficial use and the principle of no wasting. You can hear from Mr. Hoppen later on the role of the Water Board, and these are really largely Water Board questions. But the storied and famed history of water rights in California is still being written in court battles that are going on this very minute that we're sitting here, and likely will go on for a very long time. The law of California allows the state to condition water rights, which are really permits from the Water Board, and there will be a continuing battle as to whether riparian rights or appropriative rights have the same kinds of limits, and the implications of that are largely unknown, because a whole lot of the people who use water under those rights have, at least according to Water Board reports, not filed the reports legally required to just indicate what they're using. So there's a lot of lack of information. It has those contracts, the water permits, the riparian rights or appropriative rights, all have great legal significance. But they don't automatically resolve the question. If a state has now 38 million people and demands up and down the state, including for people, for business, for industry, and for the environment, how they are satisfied. The law of California largely provides a complicated, slow, and painful balancing test, largely before the Water Board. And we are obligated under the statute to consider a host of factors in developing the Delta Plan, including the allocation of water and the obligations that are out there. And as Mr. Nordhoff reminds us frequently, the old business question is not a bad one. Start with supply and demand, and once you understand something about both, you'll have a little bit better idea of where the issues are resolved.
Can I just follow up on that? I understand supply and demand, but does point of origin have any
yes,
position in that?
And the statute, I'll find the specific sections, but the area of origin, there's an area of origin statute for various parts of California. There's a Delta protection area of origin-like statute that's out there. By the way, there's a fight between Superior California and the Delta as to which is the more important or which comes first. I leave that to others to decide. Yes, those are all.
I can answer it right now.
I have no doubt. Senator, all those are there. They are legal. They're matters of great legal significance. And we've got 161 years now, almost a little more, of laws that create the backdrop for all these discussions.
You know, I just want to add, because this was such a major issue. In fact, it was the issue that probably was the greatest threat and risk to completing the work that we completed last year. That there's a very simple distinction which, while we were fighting wasn't as clear, but maybe now after the fact it's clear, and that is under current law, if this package never existed, the law provides the State Water Resources Control Board to conduct hearings upon proper petition to look at changing water rights, regardless of what the existing rights are. That's the law. So we put into this package at least a couple of times that nothing in this package changes current law. So those who say that, well, we could have our water rights affected, you could have your water rights affected under current law. And that's the distinction. Now, the fear is, well, geez, we're stating a broader public purpose here, these co-equal goals, and so that might provide a motivation, if you will, to bring more petitions before the State Water Resources Control Board. Okay. But the underlying law itself remains the same when it comes to changing water rights.
And I understand that, Mr. Chair, and have understood your position on that for years. I understand the law. But I need to get an understanding of the candidates who are nominated as to what their proclivities are when they make these decisions.
Let's hear from the other two witnesses here.
So first, Senator, thank you for sharing your water with us in the southern part of the state. Two quick comments without being too simplistic. One, I think the state calls for reasonable use of water. And the second point is it's probably in the state's best interest to provide a reliable water supply for San Diego. We create a lot of jobs, we generate a lot of tax revenue, which is shared with the rest of the state. And if I were you, I would think that in exchange for your water, you would want to see other practices employed in the parched parts of the states: conservation, recycling, and looking for other sources like desalination for water. And I think San Diego's done that. I think the target that we had of reducing usage by up to 10% in several years was exceeded after several months, and I think that can be maintained.
I come from an area that is upstream of the Delta. Many of the east side tributaries of the San Joaquin River are not unlike that of the Sacramento Valley. I think entire economies, local economies, have been built upon historic water rights. And to unwind the current water rights system would be asking for a disaster. I could not ever advocate that. In fact, I believe it was in October of 2007, and forgive me if I'm stepping on any toes, but the Legislative Analyst's Office issued a report on water, and in that there were a couple of paragraphs that said, and I summarize, the water rights system in California is antiquated, no longer serves the interests of California, and needs to be overhauled. And I disagree with that. I think the challenge before the Delta Stewardship Council is to rectify the problems that are creating the crisis in the Delta and find ways to encourage not only conservation and finding other means of water to supply parts beyond the Delta, but also to facilitate water transfers. I know a number of water agencies in the Sacramento Valley that would like to sell water. In fact, I was speaking before West Canal Board several years ago, and they had struck a deal with the Palmdale Water District to exchange water, and the Department of Water Resources said, I'm sorry, but we can't guarantee that we can make those deliveries. There is support, I believe, in the Sacramento Valley for improved conveyance, whatever that looks like, because it will help to facilitate water transfers. And I think that's where the emphasis needs to be placed, and not on reconfiguring water rights.
None of you has mentioned the creation of a new water supply, which is above the ground storage. Does anyone want to speak to that? Or?
Well, let me lead off. I have been an outspoken proponent of the need for additional water storage, both above ground and below ground. I've been a champion for sites in Temperance Flat and enlargement of Los Vaqueros. And in fact, on the federal side, an enlargement of Shasta. Senator Cogdill and I have been to numerous press conferences in support of previous legislation that would try and move us in that direction. The solutions to the Delta are not going to be this or that. It's going to be a comprehensive set of solutions. And to address the water supply reliability, you've got to have an improved conveyance system, and you have to have the ability to store more water when we have an abundance of water so that it can be released and utilized for the environment and for people when we enter periods of drought. And above ground storage as well as below ground storage is a key component to that comprehensive set of solutions.
We call it Chapter 8.
Chapter 8.
All right.
Just a last note for Senator Onestad. The objectives you used in the legislation to define the co-equal goals are the ones that we're using to organize the Delta Plan, and one of those objectives is to improve the water conveyance system and expand statewide water storage. I support that. I supported that in the Delta Vision Task Force the governor created, which I chaired, that issued the report recommending surface storage, underground storage. Mr. Fiorini's raised a very important point. As the state grows, the economy grows, the demand grows north and south, we got to make a rational use of all the options and opportunities that are out there, because you can't, no one action will solve problems for all times. You have to be deadly serious about conservation. It has to be statewide. You've got to be deadly serious about storage, and it's got to be open. It's expensive, but these things have to be done. Conveyance has to be done. Conservation has to be done. Water for the Delta ecosystem has to be done as the only way to free up this immense legal blockage, and largely, but not exclusively, in the federal courts that's gone on over the past 30 years. And that's what the water bill package essentially did, is it bundled all those together under this terminology, co-equal goals, not because they're easy to answer, not because they're easy to achieve, but they're all necessary. And part of this act, as with you as a legislator doing all these things, is to try to figure out the right approach. Just one last point. The legislation said all appointees to the council had to have a statewide perspective. I mean, it's in the statute. And we're struggling with that, as you might understand, but that's the mandate that's imposed on all 7 of us.
Thank you very much. No further questions at this point. Let's hear from witnesses in support of the nominees. I'm going to ask members, people to come on up, and we can use that mic there to be brief. You guys, Senators Cogdell and Weiland, you're always welcome to stay. But floor session will resume in 15 minutes, so it's up to you. You're welcome. Thanks, Dave. Sir.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members. Glenn Farrell with the Bryant Water Authority. We're here in support of your confirmation of each of these nominees to the Delta Stewardship Council. And that being said, I'd like to particularly note that we believe Mr. Fiorini's leadership and his experience and his ability to cross over political lines in a variety of ways to help forge compromise and consensus and agreement on complex water issues would make him a tremendous asset to the council. We support and encourage your confirmation of each of these appointees.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Next.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Steve Boyd. I'm Assistant General Manager of the Turlock Irrigation District, and I will be brief. I am here today in support of Randy Fiorini.
You need to speak right into the mic there, if you don't mind.
My name is Steve Boyd. I'm Assistant General Manager with the Turlock Irrigation District, and I am here today in support of Randy Fiorini.
You guys can go half and half if you want. Either mic is fine. Go ahead, Ms. Cole.
Kathy Cole with the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. The council was certainly a cornerstone of last year's Delta Water Management Package. These 3 gentlemen are very qualified, have the credentials necessary to do the big job they have to do, and we support their confirmation.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, David Orth with the Kings River Conservation District, representing 1.2 million acres in the central San Joaquin Valley, here to speak in support of Randy Fiorini. I've had the opportunity to work with Randy over the last 15-plus years, primarily through the Association of California Water Agencies. He's clearly shown the ability to bring the very disorganized California water community together on key issues, and he has the right character and commitment to the council, and I support his appointment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members, I'm Ron Davis with the Association of California Water Agencies. I, too, am here to speak in support of all three of your nominees. I couldn't agree with you more, Senator. Last year, the legislature approved an incredible, comprehensive package. You have three very highly qualified individuals for appointment and Senate rules confirmations today. Mr. Eisenberg has, some people have decades. He has centuries of experience in moving big public policy issues.
Centuries is a little too long. Not far from it.
And not only moving major, big public policy issues, but the water issue as well. And he demonstrated that with, as he mentioned a moment ago, he's chair of the Delta Vision Blue Ribbon Task Force. One of the things we appreciate most, he's very candid. He's not afraid to speak his opinions. So those of us, sometimes his candor does, it makes us nervous, but we appreciate the fact that he is open and free with his thinking so that we know how to react and how to work with him. Obviously, I've had the opportunity to work with Mr. Fiorini while he was chair of or as president of the Association of California Water Agencies. Very much speak in support of his ability to take very complex issues, work with a broad group of stakeholders, and bring them all together. He's very, very, very respectful of all opinions, and by virtue of that will be a good decision maker. And I think that obviously Mr. Northoff brings great acumen from the business community and a fresh perspective, and we support all three.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman and members, Dave Puglia, Western Growers Association. Mr. Chairman, I think you said it well. Now that the fighting's over and it's in the rearview mirror, we've got an opportunity to look at the legislation that was negotiated and passed by this legislature and see some of it now being implemented. And with respect to the Delta Stewardship Council, the nominees here before you have all demonstrated a commitment to the greater good. You asked the right questions about their experience and about their perspective and whether they would bring a statewide sense of obligation to this mission, and I think they all answered that question very, very well. Happy to support all three nominees.
Thank you very much, Dave.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members. Stan Van Vleck, representing Northern California Water Association, which represents a vast majority of the water north of Sacramento. We appreciate the questions that you've posed, Mr. Onestad, and ask you to continue to do so, Senator. We are here to support all three nominees, to answer your question. We're here to support all three nominees. We've enjoyed the brief time that we've had to work together. We are moving at light speed. We appreciate the effort that they're doing. They're open. They're candid. We've got to continue to do so. And we look forward to working with them and ask for your support of their appointment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Randy Knaus, East Bay Municipal Utility District. East Bay MUD supports each of these gentlemen for confirmation. We have had the opportunity to work with the council over their 6 months since these gentlemen have been appointed and the council has been meeting. Our conclusion is that they are honest, intelligent, very fair-minded individuals, and this is precisely the temperament that we believe California needs to render these very tough decisions relating to fixing the Delta.
Thank you. All right. Any opposition to the nominees? If not, can I get a motion on all three at one time? Moved by Senator Cedillo. I want to again thank all of you for very important and tough public service. We know how tough it was to pass this package, and we know you're up to the challenge of implementing it, not only to the letter, but with the spirit with which we all intended it to really make a profound difference in California's water future. Please call the roll.
Senator Cedillo. Dutton. Cedillo, aye. Dutton. Aye. Dutton, aye. Oropeza. Onestad. Steinberg.
Aye.
Steinberg, aye.
Okay, those nominations are out 3-0. They'll go to the Senate floor. They'll be taken up expeditiously, and we will see you all very soon. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Let's take a short break for Ina and for all of us.